I am Nikki. I am the founder of Ewe Felty Thing, which actually launched 5 years ago this week, which is a bit scary. I'm not entirely sure where the time went, but gone it has, and here we are. So for those of you that don't know me, I am a little bit of a wool obsessed person, I suppose. So I knit, I crochet, I spin, I felt, I weave, I dye. Basically, if you can do it with yarn, so do it with wool, I'll have a go. So I thought I would run this masterclass this evening and just try and impart a little bit of that, a little bit of knowledge to you so that you can try and get the best out of the projects that you're making. So I'm sure we've all had those experiences where, oh, Caroline's just trying to come in again. I'm sure we've all had those experiences where you've made something and it's not quite turned out the way you thought it would. So either it's not the right size or it's not sitting right. It just doesn't, it's not quite the way that you expected it to be. So the things that I'm going to try and cover this evening are hopefully just some relatively quick wins that will help you to make the most out of how you out of your knitting and crochet projects. So the first topic that we're going to be covering this evening is yarn basics. So I'm sure everybody is familiar with what yarn is, but I don't know how many people have any experience of how yarn is made. So the reason that we make yarn is to make it easier to work with, and also because if you're faced with some fibre, it's not very strong. So it can all come to pieces, it pulls apart quite easily. But when we add some twist to it, it gets suddenly very, very much stronger and it doesn't want to pull apart. And the more we twist it, and the more strands that we twist together, the stronger the yarn becomes. So you'll find that you may have come across things called singles. So those are just spun once, and other yarns tend to be twisted again, either with themselves or with something else to make them even stronger. I will just say I have a great big list of notes here because my brain is a bit like a sieve, and I will start talking about one thing and I will just, I need to have my list, otherwise I'll skip through things. So if at any point you miss something, you want me to go back, please just post in the chat. It is entirely possible that I will have glanced away from my notes for a minute. So twisting the fibres makes them stronger. So Olwen, all you can see is the table. That's not good. I should be pinned. It should be me that's pinned. And there we go. There we go. How's that? Ah, thank you. Sorry. Right, there we go. Little hiccup over, hopefully. Brill. Thank you, Jane. Glad that's better. So, yes. So when we twist fibers, it makes them a lot stronger, so they can't pull apart from each other. And so that means that when this is then yarn for you to work with, it means that you can, you've got that strength there. You can make things that it will wear better. If you were just to try and walk around with some fibre on you, it would not last very long. It would all pull to pieces. So having that twist in there, and the more twist you add, the stronger it will be. So what that means for your knitting and crochet is that you need to think about how spun a yarn is compared to what you want to be making. And there is a balance there between the strength of the yarn that you need to be using and the softness of the yarn that you need to be using. So obviously, the more you spin something, the harder it's going to get. And so it's not necessarily going to be quite as nice next to the skin. You may also have come across the terms woolen and worsted spun. So that's two different ways of preparing yarn. So if I show you these two things of fibre here, this one, it should, in fact, let me point you at the table. That's probably the best plan. There we go. So this one you should be able to see is quite fluffy, quite airy. Oh, what's happened? Somebody's not muted. Ooh. I can't see who's not muted. Oh well, there's some funny noises coming from somewhere. So this one, you should be able to see the fibres are all going in different directions, and that means that it's full of air. This preparation is called carded wool, and it means that all of the fibres have been combed and they end up like this, nice and open and fluffy. This one, all of the fibres have been combed so that they're facing in the same direction, and this makes it much, much smoother. So that it sort of slips over itself and you end up with a very smooth yarn. So I've got two here. Here's some I spun earlier. So this one, which you can hopefully see is nice and smooth, is a worsted spun yarn. And this one, which is rather more fluffy, is a woolen spun yarn. You should hopefully be able to see that there are lots of little bits of fluff coming off this one, and that it's a much rounder yarn, whereas this one is very smooth, very soft. And the reason is that when you're woolen spinning, the mixture of the preparation and the way it's spun traps air in. And because all of these fibres are facing in different directions, they will be sticking off at different directions, even when it is yarn. Whereas with this sort of preparation, because all the fibres are facing in the same direction, when you spin it, they all get trapped inside. It makes for a much denser fibre and also a much smoother fibre. So these are great for different things. So you would use a woolen spun yarn for things like colour work and cables where you want the and jumpers where you want the stitches to stay where they are and where you've got lots of stitch definition. And you would use a smooth worsted spun yarn for items that you would want to have more drape, such as shawls and things like that. Right, let me just go back to me again. There we go. hopefully everybody can see me again. So when we're looking at yarn, the next thing that often comes up is ply. So when we're talking about ply, we're not actually talking about the weight of the yarn. We're talking about how many strands there are together in there. So different yarns have a different number of strands together, and the old names 4-ply and 8-ply, which is DK, and things like that, actually come from a time way back at the start of machine spinning, when all yarns used to be spun the first time in what we call singles. So the first time you spin it is spun to a regular size. So that's where 2-ply and 4-ply and 8-ply then came from, because it would be the weight that you got when you had 2 of these strands together, or 4 of these strands together, or 8 of these strands together. That has very much changed nowadays. And so when we say 4-ply, we don't necessarily mean a yarn that has 4 strands in it. You can get singles that are 4-ply. You can get singles that are Arons and chunkies. You can get plied yarns that are lace weight. So the difference between ply as a mechanism in making yarn is very different to the weight of yarn. Most yarns that you will be using are somewhere 2 or 3-ply, because that is enough strands to create quite a nice round yarn that is strong enough for you to work with. Or a lot of roving yarns and that sort of thing are just singles spun. So I will show you this on the close-up camera in a bit, but this is a double knit and it is just singles spun. So that means that it's not going to be very hard wearing. So if you are making a project like socks, you want to make sure that you've got a yarn which has been plied, because otherwise it's not going, when you rub it, it's not going to last. I have, as an example, here is a sweater I made using singles yarn, and it is absolutely lovely and drapey, but if I hold it like that, and you see that actually it's gone quite bobbly and fluffy, and it's got a lot of haze around it, especially sort of under the arms and things like that where it's been rubbed. And that's because it hasn't been spun very much, so it doesn't have that strength to hold the fibres together. So not all yarns are created equal. So since we got away from looking at all single spun yarn being a standard width, double knit, for example, can have anywhere between round about 200 and 250 meters per 100 grams. 4-ply, depending on where you are in the world, 4-ply fingering sock weight yarn can, scarily enough, be anything from about 250 meters per 100 grams to about 480. There's a massive difference in the thickness of these yarns, and therefore how they're going to work up for you. And what we do to look at how yarns compare together is to look at something called wraps per inch. So I'm just going to spotlight the close-up cam again. And here is a wraps per inch device. So that's a centimetre there, that's an inch there. You don't need a special device. Any old ruler will do, anything that you can mark an inch on. And I have some West Yorkshire Spinners double knit yarn here. All I'm going to do is just very carefully just wrap the yarn around so that the strands are lying neatly next to each other. They're not pulled tight so that it's not affecting how thick they are. I think we can get one more on there. Yeah. So that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 wraps per inch is how thick this yarn is. So that means that if I've got a pattern that is knit, that has been created for this particular yarn, I need to make sure that whatever yarn I substitute for that has that same width. So this one that I was showing you earlier, this single spun, this is also classed as a double knit, but as we wrap it round, you'll see that it's a much thicker yarn. It's pulling a bit tight there. 7, 8, 9, 12. So that has pulled a little bit tight on there. So I'm not going to try and squidge another one in, but that is 12 wraps per inch. So that would work up fatter than fatter than this yarn would. So you might think, okay, well, it's only 1 wrap per inch, but over the size of a sweater, for example, that extra stitch size is going to add up and make quite a difference to how your garment will hang. So it was always worth checking the thickness of the yarn that you're using. There are websites out there such as Yarn Sub, and if you're okay using Ravelry, Ravelry has an option as well, where it will give you the wraps per inch of a lot of different yarns. So if you don't have access to the one that the pattern is written for, you should still be able to find that information, and it will help you to substitute your yarns and make sure that you've got the right weight of yarn for the pattern that you're trying to use. Right, give me a second because I just need to refer back to my notes because my brain is squidging slightly. Right, so on that same idea, you will all have come across the dreaded gauge square. Oh, sorry, we've got another person coming in. So you will have come across the dreaded gauge square, and this is really important. I know everybody hates it, but actually there is a really big difference that gauge will make. So if I show you these 2 pieces of fabric, these 2 pieces of fabric here, this is both the same yarn. This is both standard sock weight 4-ply yarn. This was knitted on 2 or 2.5mm needles, and this was knitted on 4mm needles. And so you can see that this makes a much tighter fabric than this one. This one is a shawl, and making it on the larger needle size means that it makes a very drapey fabric. So it's difficult to show you on the close-up camera, but the fabric has quite a nice hang to it. Whereas this one, because it's that bit more solid, it's not going to hang. It's going to keep its shape. And so depending on what you are making sure that the fabric is the texture that you want it to be is really important. And most patterns that you come across will have a suggested gauge for you to work to. So as boring as it is, it's really important to make sure that it's right. And the other reason for that is, as we saw on the wraps per inch, if I count how many stitches there are per inch here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe 7.5, and I do the same on here, one, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's 2.5 extra stitches that you get on this one to what you get on here. So that is quite an extreme example, but you should be able to see that if you've got 200 stitches round your jumper, for example, that if you've only got, for example, 5 stitches per inch on here, then having that extra 2 stitches over each inch on a 200 stitch jumper is going to make a difference of several inches in the width of your project. And so that can cause a lot of problems with how it will fit and how it will look. So as boring as the gauge square is, and as tedious as it might be to sit there and work out your wraps per inch, it really does make a huge difference to the overall look of your project and how happy you're going to be with it at the end of there. Right. So that is most of what I wanted to talk about with regards to yarn basics. So now I wanted to talk a bit about understanding different fibres. Now, the fibre that we use, or when we talk about fibre, we're talking about what the yarn is actually made of, whether it is wool from a sheep, whether it is a cotton, whether it's an acrylic, whether it's a blend of things. All of these different fibres have different properties. And so it helps when you're looking at what sort of project you're making to understand how those different fibres are going to impact what you will end up with. I'm just going to have a sip of my tea. So there are 3 main types of fibre. There are protein fibres, plant fibres, and man-made fibres. So for the most part, protein fibres are from animals, although you can, weirdly enough, they have now started making milk protein fibre, which is a separate thing entirely. That has a law unto itself, and it's a bit similar to silk and also to some plant fibres. But generally speaking, when we're talking about protein fibres, we are talking about either hair from an animal or fibres from a silkworm. So you will be familiar, I'm sure, with sheep wool, with alpaca, rabbit and goat. However, there are now a bewildering number of different animals that we get fibre from. You get camel fibre, you get yak fibre. There are all sorts of these different things, and they've got lots of different properties to them, and they've got a different feel to them, different weight to them. So it's important to have a look at the exact fibre that you're using, even if you're thinking, oh, but it's just a protein fibre. different protein fibers will have a different feel to them. They will have, some of them will have more bite to them than others. So some of them will be smoother than others. Plant fibers, again, you're probably familiar with cotton and linen and hemp. However, as with the protein fibers, there are an equally, if not more so, bewildering number of different plant fibers available now. So if you've ever been to World of Wool, then you will know that you can get nettle, pineapple, mint, all sorts of different things. My brain's gone. Tencel, which is wood pulp, all sorts of different things. And bamboo is a commonly used one. Yeah, sea cell as well. So there are all sorts of different plant fibers that you get, and for the most part, because they're made from stalks, they've got quite long, apart from cotton, which is made from fluffy bits, most of the others are made from stalks, and so they've got quite long fibers in them. So if I go back to this again, this was our wool fiber, and that's about the length of what we call the staple, so the length of the sheep's hair. Silk is all one strand wound continuously round and round the cocoon. So a single silk fiber can easily stretch the whole length of the shop. It's enormous. Plant fibers, they are the length of the stem, so they can be 30 centimeters or so long. So that length adds strength as well and changes the way that the fiber will behave when it's spun. So you'll find a lot of the time that spun plant fibers feel a bit more solid. Think about your ball of cotton string, for example. They will feel a bit more solid than protein fibers. Man-made fibers, the most common one is obviously acrylic. And for the most part, I don't use acrylic. We don't tend to stock it in the shop. There are some ecological reasons for that, but also from a pretty basic reason that I don't think it actually gives you a very nice end product. It never lasts quite as well. It bobbles. It doesn't tend to have as nice an end result as the natural fibers. But there are an awful lot of times when you want a bit of the good bits of one fiber to balance it up with the properties. There we go. You want the properties of one fiber to balance with the properties of another fiber. So that's why we have blends of yarn as well. So, for example, a standard sock yarn has got 25% nylon in there, and that is so that you've got the bounce and the coziness of the wool, but you've got that little bit of extra added strength from the nylon that will just keep the wool from wearing. Other times you will have some silk or some bamboo or cotton added into a wool yarn so that it makes it drapier, makes it that bit heavier, makes the fibers that bit smoother, and so it changes the way that the yarn will hang. So when we look at the fiber that we're using, we need to think about how that's going to have an impact on the projects that we're using. So you want to look at how much the yarn stretches. So a wool yarn has quite a bit of stretch. So I get my West Yorkshire spinners again. It does stretch a little bit. Can you see? It's got some stretch in there. But I've got a linen here, and this is very solid. There is no stretch in that whatsoever. It's very, very strong, but it would be no use whatsoever for knitting socks or something that you need to be elastic. And the same goes with cotton. Cotton is not, and most plant fibres are not very elastic. They don't have that stretch that's going to keep them reshaping themselves. So if you're wanting socks or a jumper that is going to have cuffs and a tight neck and things like that, you want to be working with something that's got that bit of stretch in there. If, however, you want to be working with something that's, you want to be having beautiful drape to it, then going with a silk blend is just going to enable you to have maybe a little bit of stretch, but it's a much heavier feeling yarn and it's much smoother and it will drape much better. So when I was learning all of this stuff, I started designing a dress, and I'm going to share it with you because it was a mess. Let me pin my close-up camera and then I can show you all the better. Right, so this dress, please excuse the dog hair, this dress was all manner of different fibres. So this gradient here is a blue-faced Leicester 4-ply. This gold is a camel silk, and this the green is a standard sock, so it's a merino nylon. And I don't know if you can see, but putting them all together, you have got a big change in how all of the stitches sit. So using the camel silk as part of the colour work section really was awful. It's bunched up in places, the stitch definition is really not nice, and it's a beautiful drapey yarn, but it just doesn't have the bite, the texture to it to be able to hold the stitch definition. The standard sock yarn does hold stitch definition, as you can see from the lace section, but combining it with the camel silk really didn't work. And again, doing it the other way around and using the blue-faced Leicester as the background and having the camel silk as the accent, again, you can see it just doesn't work. The stitches are completely different tensions and it just doesn't hold together nicely. I also have, where are we? 2 different shawls here, and they're both beautiful, but they've both got a very different feel to them. So this one is a bit of love shawl, and it was knitted in standard sock wool. These were dyed by Shonach, and the stitch definition on this is absolutely brilliant. It very much holds its place. If I try and squish it up, it doesn't. It kind of buckles instead. It holds its place. And that's because the wool has got that bit of bite to it. It's got that bit more texture there. So this other shawl is one of my favorites to wear. It's called Don't Panic, and I used a variety of different hand-dyed yarns on this one. And this is 50% silk. And so this time, the feel of it is much, much different. It does scrunch up quite small. It's not trying to hold its place quite as much as the other one, and it drapes. It hangs beautifully. And so you can squish it up and it'll go quite thin in your hand. Whereas this one is much more solid. It's got much more air in there. It doesn't want to squish in the same way. And I would say that that's because this is 100% wool, whereas this is 50% silk. So you get a very different feel to your projects depending on the fibre that you're using. And you'll also find that there's much more elasticity in this one than there is in this one with the silk. It doesn't have that same stretch to it. I also was going to show you, sorry, here's colour work that did work. So yes, using a yarn which has some bite to it means that you get the stitch definition on colour work and on cables and ribbing and things like that. So this is Rowan felted tweed, and so you can see that the stitches are quite even. They hold their place. They're not trying to slip over each other. So if you're doing colour work, try and find a yarn which does not slip over itself very easily. You don't want something that's silky. You want something that's that little bit textured to be able to hold itself and stay and keep the stitches where you put them. Right. How are we doing? Right, so we're going to look now at finishing off. So actually, I'm going to have another sip of tea first because my throat's going a bit dry. Can I just check, is everybody following okay at the moment? I've not lost everybody somewhere on my ramblings. Brill. Thank you, Amanda. Right. So the last bit of getting the most out of your projects is finishing them off so that they look professional. And there are two big things that we do to give that appearance. And the first one is neatly weaving in your ends so that you don't have bits sticking out and it's not pulled in tight in places. And the other one is blocking it. So I have, again, my trusty bees sweater that has been sitting. It's been sat there since Wonderwool last year without its ends sewn in because I don't like sewing in ends. So it's been waiting, obviously, for you guys so that I can demonstrate. So I'm going to switch my camera around again. Okay, so I do mean weaving in ends rather than sewing in, because I think it makes a big difference to how it looks. You're not, for the most part, worried about your stitches coming undone. A lot of the time, you do just have an end like this one where you've cast off and you now just have a bit that's sticking off. Now, if you've been working in the round, you will often find that you also have this sort of jog here where it doesn't quite line up. So what we can do when we're sewing up is we can close that gap. So I just thread my needle. So you're always going to want to work on the inside of your garment. The exception to that is if you've got a roll neck or something like that, where the inside becomes the outside. So what we're going to do, I'm going to pull that over here because we want to close this gap. So if I pull that through like that, there we go. It just sort of, it pulls those two threads, those two bits of the jumper together and makes it nice and neat. And to be extra short, I'm just going to go back in the same direction and just pull that again. So because I know that this is a cast off end, I'm not worried that the sweater is going to unravel. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to thread to and fro through the V's of these stitches. Can you see that on there? I'm just aware that it's dark yarn, so I'll show you again with the pale yarn in a minute. I'm not really sewing, I'm just looping the yarn through different stitches, not tightly, just frequently, because you don't want to change the hang of the fibres. You only ever want to do this after you have blocked your project. You never want to do your sewing up before you've blocked it, because it can and will change the tension of your project. So I've just woven it through all the way down there and then back up this way, and then I can just snip close. So this time I've got yarn which has not been cast off. It's just where I've stopped one colour and started another. Come on. So again, there's that little bit of a gap just where the two colours have been. So I'm going to pull that one that way, and this one I'm going to thread in this direction. And it just closes up that gap. And this time, because we're working on this bumpy side, I'm just going to pick some of these bumps and just slide it through. Just a few of them. And it won't show on the other side because you can't see those bumps. Those bumps are in between, so you can't see them. So you're just looping through very gently. And when you've done an inch or two, it's not going to come out, and you're safe just to snip. So if you've got access to these V's, it is easier just to zigzag through the, so I'm just holding that up. So you're all hopefully familiar with sort of the V's that you get on knitted stitches, so in ribbing and things like that. So it's quite easy to just zigzag in through those V's, and it hides the stitches really neatly. But if you're working on a bumpy bit, and just go up and down through the bumps in a straight, wiggly but straight line, and that will hide your edge, hide your ends in as well, so that there's no, you can't see where that was now. So before that though, you need to do your blocking. So here's one I made earlier, she says, pulling in some soggy things. So before we started, I sat and I made two. I'm just, bear with me, I'm just going to lift this up a bit. There we go. So before we started, I made two swatches. They are both identical. Again, using the West Yorkshire Spinners Illustrious. It doesn't look anything particularly spectacular at this point. It has a gentle wave and some slip-on, yarn forward knit two togethers to give it a bit more of a lacy effect. So whilst we've been on here, this version has been soaking in some warm water. So I'll take that out and give it a squish, and then my water can move out the way. I've got a bit of old towel, and I'm just going to wrap it up in there, give it a squish. So now I have, very excitingly, damp fluff. Oops. So I'm going to move the camera down again. Sorry if this goes a little bit seasick. There we are. Right. It looks a little bit flat and uninteresting at the moment. So what we're going to do is, I've got some blocking pins here, and I'm just going to start at one edge and stretch it and pin it. And then at the other end, bearing in mind I'm likely to want to move these at some point, I'm just going to put one at that corner and one in this corner. Now, I know that I've got waves in here and they're not really showing up at the moment. So again, I can just pull it into position and poke these wires in. And it just starts to help it take the shape that you want it to. I'll do the same on the bottom. And it just opens up the stitches. And don't ever be afraid to move your pins. It's very, very rare that you end up with them all in the right place to start with. I certainly never have. So I lift that one up. I can move that one. Stretch that out a bit sideways. Now you can block quite solidly, like I'm doing here, where I'm really pulling it out and stretching it, or you can block quite gently. Now, if you're just blocking for colour work on sweaters and things like that, where you just want them to look, where you're just wanting the stitches to bloom a little bit and stay, and just to look a bit more together, I suppose, then you don't necessarily want to be stretching it, because it will obviously change the shape of the sweater that you're doing. But you can just pin it to size. So if I wanted this to just stay as it is, I could just pin it so that the edges were straight, rather than trying to stretch it particularly. So I could just, there we go, make the edges nice and straight and let it do its own thing. Or you can spend time and you can pull things out and you can really block it quite hard. If it looks a little bit wonky, then it's sometimes good to add in extra pins, because you can end up with it being a little bit jagged. And if you're doing great big pieces with flat edges, so great big long shawls, then you can also get things called blocking wires, where you just thread the wire through these edge bits, and then you use a few pins just to hold the wire where you want it, and the wire will keep all of your stitches beautifully straight. So once it's blocked and it's all dry, that can, depending on the size of the piece, how warm your house is, how thick the yarn is, and all of that sort of thing, it can take a couple of days for it to dry. But once it has, you can take these pins out and you should find that it will stay exactly where you've put it. And that means that you've then got a piece with beautifully open stitches, and it will hang like this shawl, for example. This was blocked quite heavily to make sure that we had all of the lace sections showing up nicely. Things don't need blocked every time. It's usually just the first time that you finish it that you will need to block it. After that, it should mostly hold its shape, and you shouldn't need to reblock unless it looks particularly interesting after you've washed it. So let me just come back to you again. Right, I'm just going to double check my list and make sure that I've not forgotten anything. No, I think we're there. So has anybody got any questions about what I've covered this evening? Just wait a second in case anybody's typing anything. When you block, do you block each special stitch? Yes. So have a look and see how it looks once you've pinned the edges. But you might find, and I did with the Pelada Tesney, that I needed to put extra pins in along along where the sections changed, just to make sure that the lines in the shawl were nice and straight as well. So yeah, you can it isn't always necessarily, a lot of the time you can get away just with doing the edges, but if you've got different sections and they're not quite sitting right, then by all means add extra pins in, just to make sure that everything's sitting where you want it to. Brilliant. Right, well, that is the end of tonight's teaching session. I really hope that you've found it very useful. For those that would like a bit more help with getting the best from your knitting and crochet projects and things, then please do stay on for a few minutes, and I'll explain a couple of things that I'm doing at the moment, which I can do to help support you a bit more. So thank you very much, and yeah, if you want to go, then do, but if you want to stay on, then I'll explain a little bit about what I'm doing. So during lockdown, I started thank you, Jane. During lockdown, I started running some Zoom groups as a way of keeping everybody going through COVID, because we couldn't meet in person anymore and things like that. I've always really, really believed in the power of creativity and the community that comes with that, to help you get through all the things that are going on in your life and that sort of thing. So it's my knitting and things have really helped me over the years to get through health problems, get through divorce, all sorts of stresses, and they still do on a daily basis make a huge difference to me. So I wanted to be able to give that support to as many people as possible, and as a result of having started the Zoom group during lockdown, I've now started something called Wilbert's Flock as a sort of a continuation and growing on from that, so that I can provide the support and the teaching like we've had this evening, to help you get the best out of your project, but also where I can help you to have a bit of community, where we all help each other. I'm very lucky. I've got some of my flock ladies in here this evening as well, and it's a very nice, supportive atmosphere that helps us, all of us, me included, to have a little bit of accountability with your craft projects. There's always somebody else who has been through a particular technique that you're not used to, things like that, and it means that we've got that community and that support, and as well as having the access to that creative side. So the idea was basically that I wanted to have to grow what we'd been doing on the Zoom group and add to it, and just make it even better. So talks like we've done this evening, but much more in depth. I run one of those every month. I also every month do a Q&A session where I will cover things that you are specifically having problems with. So if you come and said, I really need help with blocking, we could sit there and go through how to do it with the particular sort of project that you're working on. We get guest speakers in to help with expanding your creativity, coming up with new ideas, that sort of thing. So on Saturday we've got Christine Perry from who is Winnick Mum coming and doing a sock clinic with us. We've also got lined up we've got Fiery Felt, Helen Melvin, there we go, sorry, Helen Melvin is going to come and do a talk with us in a month or two. And we've got Katie Weston, Hilltop Cloud as well, who's going to come and do a workshop with us in the summer. So there are lots of, it's not just about working on whatever project you're working on. We do try and introduce new things, get your brain going, and encourage you to try new and different techniques and things as well. If you would like to have a try of it, then whenever you sign up, you do get 7 days free, and it would be really nice to have you in there. And as I say, my reason for doing this is, as it has been with starting the shop and all the other bits that I've been doing, is that I really want to impart that joy of creativity and the way that it can help you to process and to have something positive to focus on no matter what's going on in your life. So that's why I have started Wilbert's Flock, and that's what I'm hoping to continue to deliver to you. So again, I really, really hope that you have found this evening very useful. If you've got any suggestions of things that you would like me to cover in a future masterclass, then please let me know. I will be emailing out a link to this video so that you can go back and watch it through. And yeah, I'm very grateful for you having signed up. Margaret, will the workshops be on the same day each month? In Wilbert's Flock they are. We do them on the first Thursday of the month. These ones that I do, the free teachers that I'm starting doing, they're not going to be as in-depth, and they're also going to be a bit more ad hoc as to when I can fit them in. Carrietta, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. You are very welcome. Thank you for coming. So yes, thank you very much for spending your evening with me, and I will hope to see you all soon. Good night.